All right, so here's the help video for the 3.4 homework. Again, I'm going to do 11 and 12 now. We're going to look at those at Thursday's class, but if you want to take a look, kind of get a head start, feel free. So 1, 2, and 3 ask about area. And again, since they ask about area, I know that I need to look at my graph, I need to find my x-intercepts and determine where my graph is above the x-axis and beneath the x-axis during the interval. So, graphed my function, found my x-intercepts, and I'm looking at -2 to 2. So in this one, I'm going to have 3 separate values because from -2 to -1, my graph is beneath the x-axis. So that creates my first integral. Between -1 and 0, my graph is above the x-axis, so that's why I have a positive integral from -1 to 0. And then my final value is beneath my x-axis, and so that's why I've got a negative in front of the integral from 0 to 2. Again, use your calculator to type this in using the absolute values, and if you've done it correctly, you'll get the 11.833. Number 2 is another area question, so I do that exact same thing. I look at my graph, find my 0, which in this case happens to be x equals 0. My first region is beneath my x-axis from -1 to 0, so I have a negative in front of my integral from -1 to 0. My next region is above the x-axis, so I have a positive in front of my integral from 0 to 2. And then again, remember, use your absolute value in your calculator, and we've got our value. Finally, for the area problems, again, look at your graph, find your x-intercepts, set up your interval, and again, my first interval is beneath my x-axis, so my first integral is negative. Between my next 2 zeros, I'm above the x-axis, so my integral is positive. I'm back beneath the x-axis, so my integral is negative. And then finally, I'm above my x-axis, so my final integral is positive. Again, here's another good example of why we want to be able to use the absolute value, because it's going to save us a lot of time so that you're not typing in 1, 2, 3, 4 separate integrals. 11 wants to talk about total distance and displacement. Part A is total distance, so I just set up my integral and go. I use my A and my B value, my function, and I get my value. B talks about total distance traveled, so I'm going to look at that exact same work that I did when we were looking at area. I've got to look at my graph, find my x-intercepts, determine where my graph is beneath the x-axis, put a negative in front of the integral, determine where my graph is above the x-axis, put a positive in front of my integral, and then use that absolute value option to get my final answer. 12 is the same, where part A is displacement, so I simply set up my integral and find my value. Part B is total distance traveled, so I need to find my x-intercept. First part of my interval is beneath the x-axis, so I use a negative. Second part is above the x-axis, so I use a positive. And then I use that absolute value option to get my final answer. All right, hopefully this has helped. Again, we're going to talk about 11 and 12 on Thursday. If you have any questions, feel free to bring them up. And make sure you're practicing on your calculator.